Hello and welcome. My name is Charles Leboeuf. I'm the EUChina Chief Project Certification Manager in charge of the validation process at EUChina. Today, together with my colleague Grégory Lèvre, we will provide you the latest highlights concerning the international developments. We will start with a few words concerning the technical implementation of the bilateral aviation safety arrangement between the United Kingdom. We'll start with few words concerning the technical implementation of the bilateral aviation safety arrangement, which is part of the wider Brexit arrangement between the European Union and the United Kingdom. Then, my colleague Grégory will present you the latest updates on international developments with the United States and the FAA, with China and the Chinese CAC, but also with Japan and other international partners. He will also be provided with some novelties concerning the certification management team, the CMT. The TIP, Technical Implementation Procedures, implementing the EU-UK Bilateral Aviation Safety Agreement, entered into force in May this year after the first certification oversight board held between EASA and its British counterpart, the UKCA. The TIP provides a practical implementation of the principles and provisions of the Annex 13 to the BASA, dealing with airworthiness and environmental certification. Amongst others, it puts into practice the mutual recognition of design and production oversight system of both parties. It also indicates the applicable process for export of products and contains mechanisms for cooperation and continuous qualification of both authorities. From a practical point of view, the TIP provides us with a straight identification of the processes to follow, namely in the field of approval of the certificates coming from the other authority. The process for certificate approvals envisions three paths: the automatic acceptance, the streamlined validation, and the technical validation. Concerning the automatic acceptance, in that path, in that scheme, the validating authority, the VA, recognizes and accepts the certificating authorities, the CA's, certificates without any technical involvement, without any investigation or validation exercise. This means in that case that the certificate of the CA is automatically recognized by the VA as equivalent to its own certificate, as if it would have been issued in accordance with its legislation and procedures. In that case, the VA will not issue its own corresponding certificate. The approval is therefore recognized as valid in the VA system without any showing of compliance with the applicable VA requirements. So this approach is mainly applicable to the following EU certificates. We will have an automatic acceptance by the UKCA for all EU repairs, be they minor or major. For all EU non-significant changes to type certificate, this includes also the supplemental type certificate, the non-significant STCs. This also applies to minor design changes and ETSOAs. All those certificates will be also automatically accepted by the UKCA when they are approved under the provision of the appropriate DOA privileges of an EU DOA. For these approvals, which are not subject to the automatic acceptance, we apply a risk-based approach that establishes two paths for the validation. In that case, the certificate of the CA will be validated by the VA. It will be done in accordance with either a streamlined validation, which will be limited to technical familiarization without involvement of the VA in the showing of compliance. Or it could be also a technical validation that will be performed in accordance with the LOI, the level of involvement principle by the VA. Both validation processes, the streamlined validation and the technical validation process, require a formal application to the VA. That means that in that case, the applicant will need to prepare an application package that will be checked, endorsed, and then forwarded by its certificating authority to the VA. Then the applicant will have to establish a declaration of compliance with the applicable VA requirements. That declaration of compliance will be endorsed afterwards by means of a CA statement that the design complies with the applicable VA certification basis. At the end of the process, the validating authority, the VA, will issue a design approval or a certificate. The various paragraph of the section 2.4 of the TIP details each step of the applicable process for each validation path, either the streamline or the technical validation path. Now, for the EU projects which are subject to a validation process, those which are not automatically accepted, as we've just said, there will be a need to have an application to the UKCA through the EASA. That means that before this, an applicant needs to have an EASA CSV application, a certification support for validation, which is contracted with EASA by means of an EASA Form 41. Then the applicant will have to prepare thoroughly an application package in accordance with all the provisions given in the TIP. This is true in case of streamlined validation, for the technical familiarization, but also for the technical validation process. For the EU projects which are subject to a validation by the UKCA, that means those which are not subject to the automatic acceptance, an application to the UKCA is necessary, and this will be done through the EASA. This means that beforehand, an applicant needs to contract with EASA a CSV, a certification support for validation. This is done by means of an EASA Form 41. The applicant needs to thoroughly prepare the application package in accordance with the provisions of the TIP. In case of a streamlined validation, this application data package will be supplemented with all necessary material for the technical familiarization. Then, there is a use of a specific UKCA form for that application. And the package will be provided to EASA, and EASA PCM will check, endorse, and then submit forward that application with a forward letter to the UKCA. You've got here a glimpse at the application form that you will need to use in order to apply to the UKCA. If you have questions or doubts concerning the implementation of the EU-UK Bilateral Aviation Safety Agreement or on some particular provisions of the TIP, please check our EASA webpage. We have published frequently asked questions that may directly answer your concern. In any case, do not hesitate to contact us. We are looking forward to supporting you.
Thank you, Charles. Hello, everyone. My name is Grégory Lièvre. I'm the head of the EASA Certification Director's Office, and I'm going to present you with an overview of the main developments on the international scene in relation to aircraft certification. I propose to start with an overview of recent developments in our relations with the FAA from the US. And in particular, there were interesting developments in an area quite technical, which will be captured by another presentation, which I would like to refer you to if you are interested, and that's the Software and Airborne Electronic Hardware Working Group. So that group worked on the so-called abstraction layer, which is a tool to assess alternative standards. So that group provided deliverables which were reviewed by the COB, the Certification Oversight Board. Those deliverables were endorsed and a number of follow-up actions were agreed. And if you are interested in more details, please refer to the specific presentation on that topic. The COB also reviewed some deliverables from another task force working on environmental protection. And here it was a twofold approach. So that task force was invited to reflect on ways to improve relationship between EASA and the FAA in the environmental protection area in the framework of the current TIP. And a number of deliverables were proposed, in particular guidance on basic, non-basic classification in relation to environmental protections with practical examples. So these were reviewed and should be finalized, endorsed, and implemented in the coming month. After that, the task force will continue its work, going maybe further and proposing some TIP updates in the environmental protection area. Other TIP updates might happen in the coming month, and these were discussed in the COB, in particular on some data related to aging aircraft under Part 26, which might be approved under the TIP, and potentially also on parts released without a Form 1. Whether the TIP will need to be updated or not, it's still under review. Some exchanges also took place on master minimum equipment list, and new tasks may be developed and tasked, mandated by the COB to work on improved validation processes for MMEL. There were also intense discussions between EASA and the FAA on the Safety Emphasis Item List, the SEI list. A number of decisions were made. Maybe those of highest relevance for the audience is the fact that a new governance mechanism should be implemented. This will imply, in particular, some systematic bilateral exchanges before a list is updated, and also some systematic management vetting and mutual consultation before publication. Last but not least, I wanted to inform you about the decision taken by the COB to establish a group between EASA and the FAA to review a posteriori a number of validation projects with a view to drawing some lessons learned from these activities and improving the overall validation mechanisms. So let's now go to the other side of the world and deal with the recent developments in the field of the relation between the EU and China, and EASA and CAC. Please allow me to start with a recap of certain recent achievements. In particular, on the 1st of September 2020, the Bilateral Aviation Safety Agreement, the BASA, between the European Union and China entered into force. And just 2 days after that entry into force, EASA and CAC approved the technical implementation procedures, the TIP. So that was on the 3rd of September 2020. Recently, some agreements were reached between EASA and CAC on some operational aspects of the TIP implementation, in particular with respect to the acceptance of validation without demonstration of compliance of some jet fuel additives, and for validated type certificate data sheets, updates related to automatically accepted design changes. So these are relatively operational aspects, which will be covered by some frequently asked questions and their standard answers, which were recently agreed between CAC and EASA. By the time the audience listens to that presentation, we hope that these FAQs will be online. We also discussed with CAC about other aspects of the BASA implementation, in particular the requirement for a customer letter of intent, where CAC agreed to introduce some flexibility because this is not a TIP requirement. And there were also exchanges on the termination of several pre-BASA working arrangements, the content of which was superseded by the entry into force of the Bilateral Aviation Safety Agreement. We still have a number of topics on the table between EASA and CAC. And I wanted to mention in particular 4 topics which are of high relevance for industry on both sides. So the first one is projects under transition. So these are projects which were started before the entry into force of the BASA and which had to be transitioned to the new framework. All of these projects have not yet been completed, and there are some intense discussions between EASA and CAC to ensure the completion of these projects in a timely manner. Some delays related to projects started after the entry into force, so projects which were initiated in the full BASA framework were also delayed, and these are being discussed on a case-by-case basis between EASA and CAC, and when some root causes are identified, then they are discussed on a more systematic basis between both authorities. I would like to mention as well that EASA and CAC are measuring some metrics in order to have some fact-driven information, fact-based information about how well the TIP is implemented. And last but not least, we are also discussing about the so-called independent certificates. So these are essentially organization approvals which were issued before the BASA entry into force by one organization on the territory of jurisdiction of the other organization. So as you can sense from this quick summary, the relationship is quite intense, and this is reflected in the fact that 2 COB meetings were already held, and a 3rd one is already planned for the end of October this year. The overall objective shared by both organizations is to reach a full implementation of the BASA and the TIP. Now, please let me tell you a few words about the relationship with our Japanese partners. There again, a bilateral aviation safety agreement concluded between the European Union and, in this case, Japan, entered into force last year on the 22nd of June, and the TIP was signed between GCAB and EASA a couple of weeks later in early July 2020. The implementation of the BASA and the TIP with Japan has been extremely smooth and proactive and easy, so we are quite happy with the overall relationship. And we want to go even further by improving some provisions of the TIP, in particular for the validation of significant STCs for aircraft which are not holding a GCAP TC, for updates of VTCDS for accepted design changes, and also for the revision of AFM marking and placards which are written in the Japanese language. So these are the main developments which took place in the field of relation with Japan. A few words about the relation with two historical BASA partners, Brazil and Canada. So with Brazil, we've had recently, and we continue to have, a number of discussions about the way to bridge the certification and the operations evaluation world. As you know, in EASA, we invented and deployed a few years ago the OSD, Operational Suitability Data Concept, and we are sharing our experience with our Brazilian partners. We also had a number of discussions about continued airworthiness in the framework of the BASA in a particular number of types where some information was exchanged and mutual participation was organized. We also had a number of exchanges in relation to light sport airplanes validation. That's an issue which raised some technical difficulties in relation to the scope of the BASA, and we are working on solutions with our ANAC colleagues. All this may lead at some stage to a TIP update. We are reviewing the implications of all the discussions we are having, and if necessary, a TIP update might be considered in the coming month. With Transport Canada, one of the main points of discussion was about the performance of validation activities, and this translated into two main developments. The first one was the creation of the AMAC, the Annual Meeting on Aircraft Certification. That's a group, a bit similar to what I just reported as a decision with the FAA. That's a group which was created a few years ago between EASA and TCCA, reviewing validation projects a posteriori, so closed projects, with a view to extracting from this knowledge some lessons learned, which are then fed back into the TIP update process. And the objective, of course, is always to optimize the way both authorities implement the TIP. In that framework, one of the lessons learned and identified by the AMAC is that the work plan or validation plan, as they are named in the TIP, may not have been as systematically used as anticipated. So the GSCC, the Sectoral Committee for the Annex on Airworthiness, took a decision to make a more systematic use of the work plan concept in the implementation of the TIP. So this will start in the coming month, and the GSCC will analyze the result, probably through the AMAC, in the coming month. Last but not least, I could mention that an escalation process was agreed between TCCA and EASA in order to achieve one of the objectives of the BASA, which is to have a resolution of potential divergences of view at the lowest possible level. Now, a few words about other partners with which we do not have a bilateral aviation safety agreement, but with which the relationship is still quite active. So I will start with India, and with the following information. A working arrangement on airworthiness was concluded between DGCA India and EASA on the 40th of September this year. That working arrangement is available on our website. You're invited to consult it if you want more information, and of course at any moment you can contact EASA as Charles mentioned in his presentation. We also held discussions with FATA, the authority from Russia. You may recall that we concluded a working arrangement between EASA and FATA a couple of years ago We are now working on implementing procedures to this working arrangement. These negotiations have been underway for some time now. We are still making progress, and I hope we will soon reach an agreement with our FATA partners. In parallel, some validation activities are taking place, and of course, these are discussed on a regular basis between FATA and EASA. I would also like to mention that with the Interstate Aviation Committee, some discussions started with a view to updating the working arrangement, which was concluded many years ago between IAC and EASA. Please allow me to conclude this presentation with an overview of recent developments in the framework of the CMT, the Certification Management Team. Recently, a meeting was held between the 4 constituting authorities of that group, and this was a quite intense set of bilateral and multilateral discussions. I'm trying in this slide to summarize the main highlights which might be of relevance for the audience. So the so-called CMT week was held towards the end of September this year. And I'm presenting here some of the highlights, in particular related to the CAGs, the subgroups from the CMT, and in particular the CATA, which is the subgroup working on large airplanes. And the top 3 priorities assigned to the CATA by the CMT were flight crew alerting, human factors, and fire protection. The CAP, which is the subgroup focused on propulsion matters, was also given the mandate to work in priority on 3 areas: ETOPS, endurance testing, and icing. That was also the case for the EACTB. That's a group which is focused on the interface between the airframe and the propulsion system. And the 3 main topics which were given as a mandate to the EACTB were fire prevention, in-flight engine restart, functional and reliability testing. As a main theme which was highlighted throughout the CMT week, it was recognized that some interface had to be improved between the aircraft certification and the operational evaluation activities. This was also mentioned in the framework of the IOEPB tasking. That's another group which is working on overall operational evaluation activities. The CMT also reflected on its future, and 3 main streams were identified. So first of all, the CMT should continue to work on its traditional activities, which is to harmonize policy on conventional products. That's a very critical part of the CMT mandate. However, some additional points were also identified by the CMT leaders, and in particular the need to cooperate on post-737 MAX activities on areas such as SMS, change product rules, operational evaluation. It was also recognized that some cooperation on innovation and new products could be of value for the 4 partners. So that might be another strategic stream of the CMT in the future. During that CMT week, a meeting was organized between the CMT authorities and industry. Very fruitful meeting. A lot of exchanges took place, and I want to highlight here some of the topics which were discussed. So there were exchanges with industry on validation metrics, on the use of validation work plans, on the level of involvement during validation activities, and on a number of ongoing developments such as SMS, innovation, electric and hybrid propulsion systems, regulatory framework for drones, and so on. So you will find a link between a lot of bilateral discussions, which I mentioned in my presentation, and this CMT Industry Day, when we kind of wrap up all the discussions and had an exchange with industry. On their side, industry expressed appreciation for a number of successes. Just to name 2 of them, the business continuity during the COVID crisis was highlighted as a major collective success of industry and authorities. And the improved acceptance of airworthiness directives and alternative means of compliance was also recognized as a success by industry. On their side, the industry clarified or restated their expectation for consistency, transparency, predictability on validation activities. So this concludes my presentation. Should you have more questions, please consult our website or do not hesitate to contact EASA. We are always happy to provide answers to the questions you may have. Thank you very much for your attention.